Hello, everybody. This is the first course of a series of online courses that are related to cybersecurity and more specifically to cybersecurity applied to the healthcare sector. All of them in the framework of CUREX project, which is an AIDS 2020 funded project. And in this first course, we are going to talk about a little introduction to cybersecurity and to the Gdpr. So this is the outline that we are going to follow. First of all, we are going to do an introduction. Then we will see some definitions that might be important for cybersecurity. Then we are going to see the types of users from a cybersecurity point of view. Then we will proceed with an introduction to the GDPR, and we will finish with some examples of important data breaches that has happened or that have happened in the last few years. So we can start with the introduction. And the first question that we may wonder is, what does secure mean? Okay, very short, we can say that in the framework of a computer system, of course, a computer system is secure if it behaves as it is expected from it. Okay, if I have a laptop and I want it to perform whatever, or more specifically, if I have a spreadsheet and I want to do some calculations with the spreadsheet, it is secure if the spreadsheet behaves as I expect. So it is secure if it makes all the calculations that I want it to do and anything more. I don't want it to do any other thing, because also those other things might be a risk because they are not the purpose of the spreadsheet. Okay? So a computer system can be compromised in different situations. For instance, it can be compromised because we always try to or tend to think about some hackers or something like that, but no. A computer system might be compromised, for example, with accidents and natural causes, like maybe earthquakes, because an earthquake might provoke that the computer system does not behave as I expect. Then the computer system is compromised in that case. Of course, also because of human oversight, also because of design errors. We will see that actually many products that are launched to the market have design errors, mainly because they want to launch everything as soon as possible, very quickly, and they don't perform some basic operations about data security on them. And also they can be, of course, compromised by attacks with enough resources and knowledge. But when we think about cybersecurity, we might only think about this one. But of course, you have to take into account that a system or a computer system can be also compromised by all these other factors. Then let's introduce the term information security. Well, information security is the set of preventive and reactive measures that aim to protect the information. And be careful, here we are talking about information security, and they are all the rules, all the measures to protect the information. These rules do not need to be only about computers. Okay, if I have a physical file, or I also have to put some measures so that information is not stolen or leaked or whatever. Okay, these measures pursued to maintain information's confidentiality, availability, and integrity. These are the main factors about information security. We want to preserve the confidentiality, the availability, and the integrity of information. And then cybersecurity, according to ISACA glossary, it is the protection of information assets by addressing threats to information processed, stored, and transported by internet-worked information systems. Here, we have something more specific because cybersecurity is part of information security. Okay, cybersecurity is related to the information security, but only to that information that it is stored, processed, or transported in a computer system. Okay. Therefore, cybersecurity is the area that aims to protect the computational infrastructure and everything that is related to it. In cybersecurity, what we want to do is to preserve those three key attributes that we saw about information, but related to the computational infrastructure. For this, we have standards, we have protocols, we have methods, we have rules, we have tools to minimize the risk. We have to assume that the zero risk does not exist. We will always have risks. Therefore, what we want to do is always to minimize all the risks that we have. And therefore, regarding this, cybersecurity comprises databases, metadata, files, and in general, any asset that represents that may represent a risk if it is obtained by other person. Okay, we are talking here more specifically about databases, metadata, files, because usually we have information in them. They are like the most critical parts usually, because we contain or we have a lot of information there, sometimes personal information. Okay, and that information must be protected, as we will see later, because we need to protect that information according to the Gdpr, and we need to make it anonymized and so on. And what happens regarding cybersecurity? Well, focusing first in small companies, we can see that the 67% of them don't use web-based security. Their web pages are very vulnerable because they are not correctly securized. 61% don't use antivirus on all desktops, and laptops as well. Okay? But this is a very risky behavior if you see it, okay? Because we know that sometimes some organizations or some companies, small companies, medium companies, large companies, any of them, they are a target from cyber criminals, and they might receive attacks maybe from email, like phishing or whatever. Okay, and of course, in this point, it's also important that the employees have a correct formation in cyber hygiene. We will also have another course or online course about cyber hygiene and how important it is for our employees to be familiarized with that, because we can avoid many attacks if all the employees have a good practices when opening emails or clicking wherever. Okay. And of course, we can also see that almost the half of the small companies don't use security on mail servers and services, which is even more critical than before. Okay, these servers are more critical because, as I said, you might be distributing an attack by email to all your employees or whatever. And regarding big companies, okay, maybe cybersecurity is more introduced in these big companies, but what they have to take into account is that the 67% of the big companies who suffer an attack for more than 2 weeks, they will be out of the business in 2 years. Okay, this means that if your business or your company is suffering an attack and you cannot solve it in 2 weeks, the company will finally close, because the company will not be able to recover from that attack. Also, business functions cannot operate after less than 5 days. I think actually it's 4.8 days without recovering the technological infrastructure. Nowadays, everything depends on technology, and if the technological infrastructure is not recovered in 5 days after an attack, all the business functions will start to fail. And moreover, 60% of companies have critical information in laptops and desktops. So it's very critical in these cases to have them correctly protected. As we will see later in the last section, a medical company in the United States, that company were stolen many medical records, or well, not actually medical records, but records about people, like insurance numbers and so on. The information was stolen because a laptop was stolen. Okay. Well, then going back to the term secure, we can say that a secure system is the one that is free of any risk, damage, or danger. Of course, this is impossible to obtain. A completely secure system is impossible to obtain, and because of this, what we usually do is to talk about a reliable system. Of course, many times we use secure system instead of reliable, but actually we should use reliable, okay? Because a reliable system is the one that is very likely to behave as expected, okay? A secure system is impossible to obtain. We can see here, for instance, in this image, some of the most used web browsers like Mozilla Firefox, Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, Opera, and Safari. And we see that, for instance, for Mozilla Firefox, I think this is for several years, but they have found about 270 vulnerabilities with an expansion of 63% and a 33% of unpatched users. These users are highly vulnerable, okay, because they have not patched their browser, and the vulnerabilities are known because, well, these are the known vulnerabilities, but there might be more, okay, that are unknown. Now, for instance, we can see here that the Internet Explorer has less vulnerabilities, but with more expansion, but at the same time, the number of unpatched users is much lower, and so on, okay? We can see here that any system has vulnerabilities. So we have to talk about reliable systems. Well, regarding what I have said, total security does not exist. Okay, here we have a quote from Jen Spafford, who said that the only truly secure system is the one that is powered off, cast in a block of concrete, and sealed in a lit line room with armed guards, and even then I have my doubts. Well, this is what actually happens. The secure system does not exist, even if it is powered off. Because if it is powered off, we know that there are some techniques to power on the devices. Okay, there is not a cable. Someone can go to the device and pass the button and turn it on and steal the information, even if it is after a door which is locked. Even okay, the only secure system is the one which is powered off, casting a block of concrete and sealed in a lit line room with armed guards. Well, and even though I have my doubts. Well, this is a famous quote. Sorry. Therefore, we need to use the term system reliability. Also, we have to consider that cybersecurity is not a product. We cannot sell cybersecurity as a product, but it is a process. We can sell a process, okay, in that case. It must be present in all the phases of the life cycle of a system. We cannot create a system and try to introduce cybersecurity later. If we do that, we will need to redesign everything, and we cannot take some cybersecurity actions in the first in the early life of a product, and then I forget about it in the future. I need to maintain the cybersecurity, because we can see it here. Sorry. New vulnerabilities appear, and as new vulnerabilities appear, we need to send patches to the users. Okay. All systems have vulnerabilities and failures again, and we need to plan. We need a plan to mitigate risks that appear. Okay, that's very important. And then we might wonder, why is security or cybersecurity not taken into account more? Well, here we have to say that everything regarding this is a problem of costs. I have already said about that before. Okay, here we see that developing a product taking into account cybersecurity restrictions is slower and more expensive. That's the first reason. If I want to introduce cybersecurity in my product, a good cybersecurity, it will be a process which is much slower, and more expensive. That's a fact. Also, and which is also related to this, competitiveness causes the release of incomplete products with low quality. I want to be the first one, because if I'm the first one, I will have that advantage compared to other vendors. Therefore, I prefer to release something which is not complete, even in the terms of cybersecurity, but I want to be the first one. Okay. Beta tests do not detect vulnerabilities. Beta tests are usually just to check functionality, but not for security, not to find vulnerabilities. Developers, designers, and executives lack of a solid cybersecurity training. Okay, maybe because if they have studied something regarding to computer science or something like that, they have followed maybe a course about cybersecurity, but not in a very deep way. And sometimes they are not even related to computer science. They are mathematics, or they have studied mathematics or whatever, or any engineering or whatever, and they don't have a solid cybersecurity training. And as I have said, a good marketing strategy is better and more profitable than producing a good quality product. It's the same as I said before. If I'm the first one, I will sell more than the other companies. Here is the same. If I have a good marketing strategy, maybe the quality does not need to be the best one, but it's more about marketing than about quality. Well, let's move to the second section of the presentation, definitions. First definition is information security, and we might go to the ISO standard 27000, which gives this definition of information security. Information security for this ISO standard is the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. You see here again these three key attributes that we saw before: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In addition, there are other properties that might be desirable. They are not the key ones, but they might become key ones in some products. These other properties which might be desirable are authenticity, accountability, non-repudiation, and reliability. Well, let's see a brief definition of the first one. Confidentiality. Confidentiality means that the information can only be accessed by authorized agents. Okay, that's the meaning of confidentiality. If I have something, I don't want that other people who are not supposed to access that information can get access to get access to that information. I only want to share the information with the people that I want to. Integrity. The information is not altered when it is stored, retrieved, or transmitted. Okay, this is integrity, the principle of no alteration in the information. And plausibility. Information can be accessed whenever it is needed. And regarding the secondary attributes, we have authenticity, which is the verification that someone is who they say to be. Okay, if a user says that he's John, I have to check that he is actually John. If I can perform that verification correctly, then my product has a good authenticity attribute. Accountability is the traceability of actions performed on a system. Okay, if for instance, I have a breach in my system, and because someone, but a breach which is not a vulnerability by itself, but because someone opened a port or whatever, someone did something that is a bad action or something that that person should not have done. Then I want to trace back who did that. If I can do that, then we can talk about accountability in my system as one of these attributes. And finally, non-repudiation, which means that an actor or an user cannot dispute the ownership of an information or the modifications that they made. Okay, we can ensure that if a person or I can ensure that this change was made by this user. Okay, and this term about non-repudiation is very popular now because of blockchain technology. Okay, with blockchain technology, we have the non-repudiation factor as a key factor as well, as a key attribute. These attributes become essential in digital signatures, which is also part of cybersecurity. Okay, not only the previous primary attributes, but these attributes are also essential when we talk about, for instance, digital signatures. We have to check out authenticity, because I want to check that someone is who actually they say to be. Accountability, I want to trace all the actions. And repudiation, if something is signed by a person, that person cannot repudiate their sign. Well, more definitions. Damage. A damage is a degradation that occurs as a result of a failure in a system. I think that you all know what damage is. These damages might be economical, physical, moral, even, etc. And they might be fortuitous or provoked. Attack. An attack is the action of intentionally causing damage to a system. Okay. Here in attack, we don't take into account the fortuitous damages. For instance, something falls down from a table or something like that. That also might be a damage, but it is not an attack. Okay, the action of causing that damage is not provoked. And then we have risk. Risk is the product between the magnitude of the damage and the probability that it occurs. Okay, you can see it here. Risk is damage times the probability of that damage. What does this mean? That a low but highly probable damage may pose more risk than a major damage, although very unlikely. Okay, I have a damage which might be, for instance, imagine that the hard drive is destroyed, but the probability is very, very, very low. But I have another damage which might be, for instance, I don't know, to delete a file, but which is highly probable. In that case, that risk is higher than destroying the whole hard drive, because the probability of occurring is much higher than the other one. Okay. More definitions. Threat. A threat is a damage situation whose risk of occurring is significant. That's a threat. Okay. It's a risk with a damage is a situation whose risk of occurring is significant with a high risk. Vulnerability is the deficiency of a system capable of producing, in this case, the accidentality or intentionality, a failure in it, or what is the same, it is a weak point. Here, we see that we have again accidentally failures. Okay, that is also a vulnerability, because maybe I have a vulnerability that I don't know that. Well, not talking about software, but about about a computer, a desktop, okay, or a laptop, which is much more for this example. I think it's better. If I have a laptop, the risk of it falling down from the table is there. Well, I was going to be that it is high, but it is there. I don't know if high or not. But that is a vulnerability of laptops compared to desktops. A desktop is much less probable to fall down than a laptop. So it's a kind of vulnerability of laptops. Exploit is a technique that allows to take advantage of a vulnerability to produce damage and to break the security of a system. Here we already see that with an exploit we can cause damage. Okay, and it is because we can exploit the vulnerability. Okay, we can see here that we say that we exploit a vulnerability, that it's an exploit. And bug, any programmer might be familiarized with bugs. A bug is the result of a programming error which has been introduced in the process of creating a computer program. Okay, and of course, many times bugs result in vulnerabilities, which might be exploited or not. Okay. Talking about an attack, we can classify attacks as logical or physical. The logical attack aims to, or is their target is the data and or the software. We want, maybe I want to steal data, I want to do something with the, or I want to break a software or whatever. Okay, and we have physical attacks, which are whose targets are devices. But of course, the physical attacks derive in logical attacks, because if I want to break a hard drive, then I will lose the data in it. So finally, it will be also a logical attack. A network can never be considered secure. It's the same as a system. A network, a computer network, can never be considered secure because we have new attacks, and operative security can never be guaranteed. For instance, a router might fail and data might be lost. Okay, if I have a network, even because remember that something is secure if it behaves as I expect. Therefore, if I have a network, I expect that data is transmitted from one point to the other point. But imagine that a router fails. If a router fails, then the data might be lost and it will not behave as I expect. So this brings us to the fact that networks are not secure as well. And if we talk about data, how can data be threatened? Okay, it can be threatened, for instance, because of an interruption. An interruption in, for instance, in a system because an object of the system is lost, unavailable, or damaged. Okay, imagine that I have a database management system and I send some data to store that data on it. If for some reason the database management system is not available, I might lose that data if I don't manage the information correctly, if I don't check that it has been correctly stored and so on. So in that case, data might be threatened because the database management system is not available. Also, data can be threatened because of an interception. An interception is that an element that we don't have taken into account, which is an unauthorized element, gets access to an object of the system. And this is very difficult to detect because, of course, imagine that I send the information to the database management system. Okay, if the database is not available, of course, I can check that it was not available. But if the message in which I'm sending the information is intercepted, I cannot detect it. I cannot detect that fact because the system will receive the information and I will not know that a copy has been done of that data. And data can also be threatened because of a modification. if an object of the system is altered. That is not that difficult to detect as in the previous case of interception. And we can also fabricate as an object similar to the existing one, or we can fabricate another object. Okay, that's a fabrication threat. Let's focus in these threats a little bit more. Interruption, as I said, an interruption is the threat that occurs when an object of the system is lost, unavailable, or damaged. We have here a representation that A sends something to B, but here the network is not available, or the router is damaged, and we cannot reach the other device or system. Okay, this is a data threat. It affects to the key attribute of availability. If you remember, okay, the availability is one of the three main attributes of cybersecurity. And some examples: if we have a denial of service attack, a DOS attack, which consists on sending a lot of requests to a system so that the system cannot process all of them, and in that case we might get the system off, we might power it off or whatever, and we will make it unavailable. Okay. Also, the destruction of a hardware element, the outage of a communication line, disable the file management system is also similar to the case in which I said that that the database management system is not available for any reason because the service is not up or whatever. And in that case, in that case and in all these cases, we have an interruption threat for data. In the case of interception, as I said before, we see that A sends something to B, but here we have a third party, C, which intercepts the object, which steals the object without the knowledge of that happening from A or B. Okay. In this case, this affects to the key attribute of confidentiality. Okay. Examples: information that is captured by a sniffer, illicit copies of files or programs. When we copy, for instance, a film or whatever from the internet, okay, this is an interception threat. And also reading packet headers to reveal the identity. Well, this last point is actually very similar to the first one. Reading packet headers to reveal the identity of the users involved in an illegally observed communication. Okay, that in that case I can steal the identity of the person or of the people in the conversation. Modification, in this case, the message is intercepted by C, but C does not allow that the original message is sent to B, but it intercepts the message, alters it, and then C sends the message again to B. In this case, it affects the primary attribute of integrity and the secondary attribute of authenticity, because of course if you can see, we have not checked that the user is who is supposed to be, or the emitter in this case, because actually the emitter would be C instead of A. Okay, so in this case we have a violation of two attributes, a primary attribute and a secondary attribute. Examples: a man-in-the-middle attack. With a man-in-the-middle attack is the definition of this: intercepting something, making a modification, and then sending it back. Also, if we change the values in a data file, for instance, I get access to a file of my organization and I make a change, a malicious change in that file, an alteration of a software that changes its behavior, the modification of messages in a network. Well, actually, the modification of messages in a network is also a man-in-the-middle attack. And finally, fabrication. Fabrication, in this case, A does not produce any message, but the message is produced by C, which is sent to B. Okay. As it says, an unauthorized entity inserts fake objects in the system. It's like identity supplantation. In this case, this affects to the attribute of authenticity. And some examples: insertion of messages in a network, addition of records to a file. As I said before, not only I get access to a file of my company, but I create more files. Obtaining a key and using it to access to the information is also a fabrication threat. Okay? And we can talk also about types of threats. We have we can have several classification of threats. The first one is the classification in internal and external threats. Okay, an internal threat is the threat is a threat that is the most serious one and usually appear when good practices are not considered. For instance, black or default passwords. Okay, it's something that it depends on us. That's because we talk about an internal threat, because it depends on us to avoid that threat. It depends on us changing the default passwords. It depends on us to encrypt the information that I want to transmit. And then we have external threats. Are usually based on technical methods to attack through the network, and they can be fought with firewalls, routers, ACLs, intrusion prevention systems, and so on. Okay, but they are not related to us. It's in my hand to encrypt the information that I want to send by network, but it's not in my hand that someone wants to attack. But I can try to avoid them with firewalls or whatever. Okay. And the other classification of threats are between unstructured and structures. An unstructured threat is the threat that is derived from the use by inexperienced individuals or readily available hacking tools such as shell scripts and password crackers. This means, okay, an unstructured threat is that an individual tries to crack something, an individual tries to obtain a password from a computer. I want to steal some information from a specific computer. Usually they are usually done by inexperienced individuals and so on. Okay, and structured threats come from hackers whose motivation is high and who are technically competent. They're called structured because they follow a methodology. There might be several people involved in the attack. Okay, and these hackers know the vulnerabilities of the systems and can understand and develop scripts. They can use sophisticated techniques to penetrate to the most unsuspected businesses. Okay, they are like more elaborated. An structured threat is more elaborated than an unstructured one. Sorry. We have already talked about threats. Now we can also talk about the classification of vulnerabilities. Okay, how to classify the vulnerabilities that the different manufacturers publish. Okay, we have a database which is called the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures (CVE), holds all the vulnerabilities that has been discovered for a system or for all systems that are registered. CVE is a code assigned to a vulnerability that allows it to be uniquely identified. We can identify all the vulnerabilities using the CVE database. It provides a universal identifier for vulnerabilities, and we may have it has different elements like identifier, the state, which is candidate or entry, a brief description of the vulnerability, and references. Mitre is a non-profit organization that manages all the CVEs. It is responsible for registering and making official all the data related to vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and known attacks. All this information is public and can be freely consulted. Okay, we can go to the appropriate web page and we can download all the vulnerabilities of software that that we want or consult or whatever. Oh, sorry. Then we also have Common Weakness Enumeration, CWE. CWE is a list of types of software weaknesses intended for developers and security professionals. It was created to unify the description of software security weaknesses in terms of architecture, design, and code. It can be seen as a catalog of documented weaknesses that are often committed by programming and that could lead to vulnerabilities. CWE satisfies the need to know and have cataloged the different existing weaknesses. Be careful, here we are talking about weaknesses and not about vulnerabilities. And finally, we have the Common Attack Pattern Enumeration and Classification, CAPEC, which is a catalog of attack patterns that is responsible for collecting information about them, along with an exhaustive classification scheme. These attacks patterns are nothing more than descriptions of common methods used for exploiting vulnerabilities. Okay, for instance, we have SQL injection here from command line execution, object relational mapping injection, blind SQL injection. Okay, different subtopics about SQL injection. Then we can relate all of them in this way. A vulnerability, which is contained in the CVE, is exploited by taking advantage of weaknesses, CWE. So we see that the vulnerability is exploited by means or because a weakness exists, and a weakness that is present in a software. Okay, and in turn we can exploit the weakness through an attack pattern. Okay, so we see that we have vulnerabilities that are exploited, taking advantage of weaknesses, and these weaknesses are exploited through an attack pattern. More definitions. More definitions. Honeypots. Honeypots are resources that are developed and maintained with the intention of pretending to be a real target that attracts attackers. Okay, it is not like a toy that I give to someone that is learning about how to attack something. No. It is a real resource, a real objective to attract attackers. And why do I want to have this? Okay, the objective of honeypots is to first to early detect attacks and to prevent them. Because if I have a honeypot, for instance, I'm a developer of a database management system, and I I deploy the system, the database management system, in a server, claiming that I have like very good information there, and I try to attack the hackers and the cyber criminals. I want to attract them to my new system, which is actually a honeypot. And that way I can know how they are going to try to attack my system, and I can see if they try to attack, and if they achieve to exploit my system, to exploit a vulnerability present in my system. Okay. Moreover, they can also deflect such attacks and distract the attacker. If they are attacking that system, they are not attacking other systems. And also we can obtain information from the attacker sometimes. They are not actually a defense mechanism, but it is a mechanism to detect, distract the hackers, and also to as a method of early warning. This a honeypot is a source of information that may contain, as I said before, we may obtain information about the attacker. We can detect attackers with honeypots. We can obtain, if the attacker is not well sophisticated, we can obtain the location, the IP, the alias, the date and time, and so on. And we can also get information about the attack, the technique, the failed attempts, the discovery and exploited vulnerabilities, the system risk level. We can obtain information about our system to try to improve it and try to solve the problems that the system has. Regarding the types of vulnerabilities, well, first of all, we have technological vulnerabilities. Computers and networks have intrinsic weaknesses. As I have said, we will always have weaknesses. Okay, and these are the technological vulnerabilities. We have network protocol vulnerabilities. For instance, HTTP, FTP, and ICMP are inherently unsecure protocols. Okay, now we have HTTPS, which is HTTP secure, but HTTP is an unsecure protocol. FTP is an unsecure protocol because they were thought before all the they were thought in the very early life of internet. Therefore, the security was not taken into account for them. If we want to take into account security, we have to use HTTPS or other protocols, and we have to be careful with this. Maybe instead of FTP, use SCP or whatever. Okay, but we have to be careful with that. Network equipment, and of course, also talking about network protocols. Even though we have HTTPS, we can see that many web pages still use HTTP. And HTTP is vulnerable because information is not encrypted, for instance. If the encryption is not included, of course not in other layer. But HTTPS presents more security. Network equipment, we have routers, we have firewalls, switches. All of them have weaknesses. And that weaknesses must be recognized and they must be protected. Key protection, routing protocols, holes in firewalls. And of course, also in the field of technological vulnerabilities, we have the vulnerabilities of operating systems. We know that periodically we have patches to apply to our operating system because we have new vulnerabilities that appear, that are discovered, and this is something that we cannot avoid. It's once again the same. Every system, and in this case an operating system, will always have weaknesses. We will always have, therefore, vulnerabilities. And we need to patch all these vulnerabilities. Second type of vulnerability, configuration vulnerabilities. System administrators must configure devices properly to avoid these vulnerabilities. Okay, they are like more easy to avoid, but we have to take them into account. Okay, because we have, regarding user accounts, unsecure transmission, exposing personal information and passwords, use of weak passwords. If I use a weak password to access to the administration panel of my router, that's a problem, and that's a configuration vulnerability. The use of a weak password to access to the administration panel of my router. I can imagine if a third party gets access to the router because I have used a password which is like potato or something like that. Okay. Also, configuration vulnerabilities, unconfigured internet services. If I have JavaScript enabled or other services enabled like Flash, or which is much more older, but they are there. And also unconfigured network equipment. Now it's not the network equipment itself, but but having it unconfigured. If I don't configure correctly the ACLs, the access control list of who can access what in my network, or if I don't have properly configured the network protocols, all those they are vulnerabilities that can be avoided. We can avoid the risk. They are a vulnerability, but we can avoid the risk. We can minimize the risk. We can make the probability of the vulnerability to be very low. Another type of vulnerability are security policies vulnerabilities. Okay. Some security policies may suppose unexpected vulnerabilities. Well, the first one is that there is a lack of a written security policy. The security policy is okay. I do what I want. I do what I think that it's better to do for my organization, but I don't have a written security policy. Does that not work? Because there will be incoherencies. If what happens if tomorrow there is a new member in the team or whatever? That's not actually a policy. If we don't have the policy written, we don't have a security policy. Okay. Then we have lack of agreement, because imagine that I'm using a version of the security policy and my partner is using another one. Lack of continuity. Software and hardware updates do not follow a given policy. I let all the users to update their software whenever they want, or I allow them to install whatever they want in their laptops or desktops. No, that's not a good security policy. Or also the lack of a disaster recovery plan, because we need to assume that we will have attacks and we might have a disaster, and we need a disaster recovery plan, how to recover everything back. We need a plan for everything, because otherwise, do you remember that I said before that about 2/3 of the companies who suffer an attack for more than 2 weeks will be out of the business in 2 years? If we have a good recovery plan, we will be back in less than 2 weeks. But if we lack of this plan, we will not be able to recover in 2 weeks. This is very important, and it is a vulnerability. Almost all network intrusions, about 99%, are the result of an attack against known vulnerabilities or configuration error that can be solved. And this is a problem. Okay? Almost all of them are because of known vulnerabilities that we can avoid because we don't have applied a patch, because we don't have configured everything correctly, or whatever. Of course, there are, and here it comes a new definition, there are other vulnerabilities which are known as zero-day vulnerabilities, which are vulnerabilities that are unknown to those who should be interested in mitigating it or them. In this case, it's like a new vulnerability that was not known before, and we should. Okay, and the window of vulnerability is the time that elapses from when a vulnerability is detected in a system until it is solved. Problems with zero-day vulnerabilities. Well, first of all, we cannot be sure when the vulnerability was detected. Okay, we don't know when was the 0 day of the vulnerability. Someone who detects the vulnerability and exploit it without making it public. I might be exploiting a vulnerability and I don't want to share my knowledge with if imagine that I'm a cyber criminal and I know how to get access to health records of an institution. Maybe I don't want to make it public, at least now. Maybe tomorrow I try to sell all the information that I stole, and then, of course, it will be public that there is a vulnerability, and they will try to find what happens. But I can be stealing information for years, and nobody might know. Okay, and also from the perspective of a developer or a company, if we publish too many vulnerabilities, we create the impression that our system is insecure. Of course, our system is insecure always, but as I said before, everything is about marketing. If I publish many vulnerabilities, people will say that my system is insecure. So if I find out a vulnerability, it's better to not to say anything. Well, it's not better. It's actually it's bad. Okay, but for me, I can't think that it's better not to say anything, and if nobody discovers it, that's okay. And even if somebody discovers it, but nobody knows about that, it's also okay. No, that it's not okay. Okay, but this happens. Unfortunately, this happens. Okay, let's move now to the types of users. Here we have several types of users from, as I said also before, from a point of view of cybersecurity. First of all, we have a hacker. A hacker is a person with extensive computer skills who uses computers as an intellectual challenge. And here we have to be careful because it's just a person with extensive computer skills who uses computers as an intellectual challenge. A hacker does not need to be a cyber criminal. They might be security analysts in companies. Also, a company might hire a hacker to find vulnerabilities in their software, and he or she is a hacker. Okay, the hacker must have extensive knowledge in technology, electronics, or communications. The hackers are permanently updated. They have to be very updated, even with zero-day attacks. There are forums in which zero-day attacks are published. They are published by hackers, but not by cyber criminals. Okay, a hacker might be devoted to investigate vulnerabilities in systems. Maybe because they are happy with that. They they get like a self-recognition about doing that, and they publish the zero-day vulnerabilities in forums. Okay, so they are permanently updated and know in depth everything related to programming and complex systems. A hacker is a born researcher. They have to research to find out something. If a hacker does not find out something, it's not a good hacker, and therefore is not a good researcher. Usually, they look for information without causing any damage. As I said before, we have ethical hacking versus cyber criminals. Ethical hacking, I try to find out vulnerabilities in a system, but to notify them, even if it is inside of a company, or if they do it for fun. Then we have a cracker. Of course, a cracker is a criminal. A cracker is a person who uses other people's computers to commit crimes. Okay, they don't use their own computers. They use other people's computers. They have compulsive behavior. They boast of their ability to exploit computer systems. They boast about it in forums or whatever. A cracker is a malicious person. This is similar to a hacker because they are also skillful in software and hardware programming. They design software and hardware to crack software and communications, such as telephone, email. They try to control other remote computers. So they get inside other devices. They go to other devices and try to read an email or try to control the devices or whatever. Then we have script kiddies. Script kiddies are inexperienced users who breaches the security of a system using exploits. Okay, they are usually just simple internet users, but with knowledge about hacking. Without knowledge about hacking or cracking. They don't have advanced knowledge. What they do is to collect information from the internet, try to download this from here. I read something in a web page that this is a password cracker, and I try to download the software in my computer and let's see what happens. And when they do that, what they actually are doing is to infect their own computers. Because of course, if there is a password cracker, maybe that is something which is there exactly for script kiddies, and they think that it is a password cracker, and it might be an actual password cracker, but only cracking very simple passwords. And what they are actually doing is to infect their own computers. Okay, they are fans of these topics, and they don't really understand them. They don't really understand what they are doing. Maybe they download a password cracker, and they don't know if the algorithm that they are using is brute force or whatever. And then we have also lammers. Lammers is a person eager to reach the level of a hacker, but their little training and knowledge prevent them from realizing this dream. They are quite similar to script kiddies, but with the difference that a lammer is interested in reaching to the level of a hacker, but they cannot. Their job is reduced to running programs created by others, downloading indiscriminately any type of program that they find in the internet. Okay, they try to get more training, but they don't actually get to the level of hacker. We have copy hackers. A copy hacker is a counterfeiter dedicated to cracking hardware, especially in the sector of cards for pet TV channels. They are interested in technology, in electronics, and so on, but their main motivation is economical. A copy hacker are the people usually they try to they get the ideas from a hacker. They usually get along very well with hackers, and they try to have a friendship with an internet friendship, a virtual friendship with hackers, and they get information from those hackers to do whatever they want to do. In this case, to crack hardware, and for instance, to get copies of cards for pet TV channels and so on. But here we have an economical motivation. And finally, well, there are more users, but we're going to finish the list here. We have hacktivists. A hacktivist is a hacker who uses technology to claim his or her ideas, social, political, or whatever. Okay, we have anonymous. This is a clear example of hacktivism. Well, now let's move to the introduction to the GDPR. Okay, the GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation from the European Union, which was adopted in 2016. The regulation is from 2016, but it became an enforcement on 2018. Okay, 2 years later. Well, if we take the definition from Wikipedia, the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is a regulation in the European Union law on data protection and privacy in the European Union, but not only in the European Union, but also in the European Economic Area. It's an enforcement in all European Economic Area, which englobes more countries that not only the European Union. It also addresses the transfer of personal data outside the European Union and the European Economic Area. Between the transfer of personal information about outside the European Union and the European Economic Area. It supersedes the Data Protection Directive from 1995, and it does not only affect to the countries in these areas, in the European Union and the European Economic Area. It also affects to any country processing personal data from citizens from the European Economic Area, since it englobes as well the European Union. Even if the enterprise is not located in the European Economic Area. Imagine that a company in the United States is processing personal data about a citizen from Belgium. In that case, that company, even if the company is from the United States, is enforced to follow the GDPR for the data related to those citizens. Of course, if they are for citizens from other countries not in the European Union or in the EEA, they can follow other regulations. Let's see some definitions in the GDPR. First of all, these definitions are given by Article 4 of the GDPR. The first definition is a data subject. A data subject is an identified or identifiable natural person. Okay, it's a natural person who we can identify. A person who can be identified directly or indirectly in particular by reference to an identifier such as a name, identification number, location data, or online identifier. Okay, if I can identify the person, for instance, by an ID card number, then it is a data subject, even if the identification is done indirectly. Okay, I have an online identifier, but that online identifier belongs to a person. Then that person is a data subject. Personal data is any information relating to a data subject. That identifier must be a personal data, of course. And processing, any operation which is performed on personal data, whether or not by automated means. Okay, because sometimes we think about processing as an automatic process, but in this case, for the Gdpr, a process processing information is also an operation done by a human with that information. Okay, and it is always related to collection, recording, organization, structuring, storage, adoption, or alteration, retrieval, consultation, use, disclosure by transmission, dissemination, or making available, alignment or combination, restriction, erasure, or destruction of data. Okay, all these things are considered by the GDPR as processing information. If we collect data, if we record data, if we alter data, if we delete data, the deletion is also a process of information for GDPR. Pseudonymization is the process of processing personal data. Of course, we are going to do something with data, so we are processing personal data in such a manner that the personal data cannot be longer attributed to a specific data subject without the use of additional information. Okay, for instance, imagine that instead of using an ID card number, I use an online identifier. Then the data is pseudonymized, but of course, the purpose is that I can know who is the person who belongs to this identifier, my online identifier. Then I need to have more information, that additional information which relates an online identifier with an ID card number, for instance. Okay. Data controller is the natural or legal person which determines the purposes and means of the processing of personal data. Okay, is the entity which controls the data mainly. Okay, the entity that belongs to the data is the entity that wants you to give a consent for collecting the data. The processor is the natural or legal person which processes data on behalf of the controller. Okay, the controller is like the owner, but maybe the controller is not processing the information, but for instance, imagine that you are sending the information to a database, to the cloud, a database on the cloud. Then the data processor is the person who deploys the cloud system. Person, talking about person as a natural or legal person. Okay. Well, that about definitions. Now, there are more definitions in Article 4, but these are the more important ones. Let's move to Article 5, which is related to principles relating to processing of personal data. The principles about processing this personal data. Okay. This article says that personal data shall be processed lawfully, fairly, and in a transparent manner, collected for specified, explicit, and legitimate purposes are not further processed. Okay, if I give a consent for this information to be processed in this way, it is not legal to process this data in any other way. Also, the personal data shall be adequate, relevant, and limited to what is necessary. If I don't need an ID card number, why am I asking for it? I cannot directly. If I don't need the ID card number, I cannot ask for it. I mustn't ask for it. Also, the personal data must be accurate and, where necessary, kept up to date. I cannot have information which is not updated, okay, when it is necessary. Also, it must be kept in a form which permits identification of data subject for no longer than is necessary. Okay, maybe if I want to identify data subjects for a period of time, but it is not necessary later, I must like forget or delete that relationship between anonymized data and the actual data subject. And also, this data must be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security of the personal data. And we need, and this is very point I wanted to transcribe it here because we need to, in this case, we need cybersecurity, and also, well, we need information security, but when the information is in a computer, we need cybersecurity, okay? The information must be processed in a manner that ensures appropriate security of the personal data, including protection against unauthorized or unlawful processing and against accidental loss, destruction, or damage, using appropriate technical or organizational measures. Therefore, with this article, GDPR enforces us to put the appropriate technical and organizational measures. GDPR enforces cybersecurity when you treat personal data. And this is very important because you might be fined, or you might get a penalization if you don't put the correct cybersecurity measures. And the control shall be responsible for and be able to demonstrate compliance with this. So, if the entity that is responsible for fulfilling the GDPR in a country asks a company or in general the controller to demonstrate that you have put the correct and the appropriate technical measures, that you have implemented cybersecurity, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have done it. Article 6 talks about lawfulness of processing. Data processing can only be done if one of the following bullets is fulfilled. Okay, you cannot process information without one of the following items. If the one of the following items is not fulfilled, data subject has been consent. Okay, this is like the main point. Like now, from since the GDPR has been launched and implemented, you always need to give consent on processing your data. Or maybe you have not given explicit consent, but the organization, the data controller, needs to fulfill a contractual obligation with a data subject. If they, for instance, imagine that I'm going to rent a flat, and I need to fulfill the company who rents the flat needs to fulfill the contractual obligations, then they might process the data, the personal data. Okay. Also, to comply with a data controller's legal obligations, imagine that I need to send to the government all the data. Imagine a hotel. Sometimes hotels need to send the data of the people who has been in the who has been hosted in the hotel, and they can do that because it's a legal obligation, okay, without us explicitly giving consent about that. Also, to protect the vital interest of the data subject or other person, okay, if I know that a person is in risk of being murdered or whatever, I can also use the personal information for vital interests. Perform a task in the public interest or in official authority, and for the legitimate interest of a data controller or a third party, unless these interests are overridden by interests of the data subject or her or his rights according to the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Okay, regarding the most important point, regarding the informed consent. Regarding the informed consent, we need to take some things into account. First of all, it must be an explicit, the consent must be explicit for data collected and its purpose that the data is used for. Okay, I need to give explicit consent for each purpose. And if I have not given consent to send the information, for instance, to a third party, the controller cannot send the information to a third party. Otherwise, it would be illegal. The consent must be specific, freely given, plainly worded, and unambiguously, and it must be unambiguous information given by the data subject. Be careful, because before or prior to the GDPR, we had already selected checkboxes for the treatment of data. Now it is not legal to have a selected by default checkbox, because it is a violation of the GDPR, because the consent is not ambiguously affirmed. Because maybe I have not seen the checkbox. Otherwise, if I check the box by myself, theoretically, I have read what I'm checking. Multiple types of processing may not be bundled together into a single affirmation prompt, as this is not specific to its use of data, and the individual permissions are not freely given. Okay, because maybe I want the company to contact me, but I don't want the company to give my data to a third party. Then, if they want to contact me and they want to give the data to a third party, I need to check boxes in this case, supposing that it's in an internet-based form. The subjects must be allowed to withdraw the consent at any time. Okay, I don't want that my data is processed anymore. Then I must be allowed to withdraw the consent at any time. Consent for children being less than 16 years old, and 16 years old, but the GDPR allows the countries to decrease this until 13 years old. Okay, but by default it's 16 years old. The consent for children between 13 and 16 years old must be given by child's parents or custodian. Then moving to the Article 25, which is about data protection by design and by default, we can see that, okay, well, this is actually what the article says. Well, it's a little bit longer, but this means that any organization needs to implement the GDPR by design or by default. Okay, they cannot omit the GDPR in any states, and if we want to, if we are going to treat new data, I need to default and we need to define our processes, to design our processes to fulfill with the GDPR. As it says, the controller shall, both at the time of the determination of the means for processing and at the time of processing itself, implement appropriate technical and organizational measures, which are designed to implement data protection principles, both when I want to determine the means for processing and the processing itself, by design and by default. Moreover, the controller shall implement appropriate technical and organizational measures for ensuring that, by default, only personal data which are necessary for its specific purpose of the processing are processed. Okay? Only the specific subset of the personal data that I need for that process is processed. Okay? In this regard, pseudonymization is a required process for stored data, because it is said here only personal data which is necessary for its specific purpose or processing are processed. Okay, so pseudonymized is required. If I need at some point to know the subject data, then and only then is when I can access the information that relates a pseudonymized person with the data subject. Encryption is a form of pseudonymization. It renders the original data to unintelligible, and the process cannot be reversed without access to the correct decryption key. Pseudonymization can also be achieved with tokenization. Tokenization replaces sensitive data with non-sensitive substitutes, tokens. Imagine that I substitute the ID card by an online identifier. Okay. Tokens have because in this case, tokens have no exploitable meaning or value, but they allow for specific data to be fully or partially processed, while sensitive information is kept hidden. That case, okay, I don't store the ID card, but an online identifier, which I only know what's the meaning of it. But in that case, I need to keep the relationship between online identifiers and ID cards somewhere. The GDPR requires for the additional information to be kept separately from the pseudonymized data. Okay, I cannot keep for instance, in the case of encryption, the decryption key, or in the case of tokenization, the relationships between ID cards and online ID identifiers. I cannot keep that information for instance, in the same database as the pseudonymized data. I need to keep it in a separate place. And what happens if I have a breach, a data breach, a personal data breach? Well, Articles 33 and 34 says that in the case of a personal data breach, the controller must notify it to the supervisory authority competent in less than 72 hours after becoming aware of it. Well, it says that they must do it as soon as possible, as soon as they discover the personal data breach, but it is forbidden to do it in more than 72 hours. They give them 72 hours. Controllers shall implement appropriate technical and organizational measures for ensuring that, by default, only personal data which are necessary for its specific purpose of the processing are processed. It says it again here. Moreover, data subject must be notified if a high risk of an adverse impact is determined. If a personal, this is stated in Article 33, and this is stated in Article 34. If a personal data breach happens, we need to notify the supervisory authority competent in this period of time. But if there is a high risk of an adverse impact, they must also notify the data subjects. Imagine that my password is stolen. If my password is stolen, or the password of the users are stolen, I need to notify all the data subjects to change their password. Or if their bank account number or credit card number is stolen, I need to notify the data subjects. And let's go through the last part of this presentation. Important data breaches in the last years that has happened. Well, we can start with a Yahoo data breach, which firstly happened in August 2013, but the impact was the actual impact was actually known in October 2017. The impact was of 3 billion accounts. It's one of the largest data breaches in history. In August 2013, it was said that 1 billion accounts were compromised. Okay, in this case, in the case of Yahoo data breach, security questions and answers were compromised. Imagine what this might happen, because this information was not encrypted, and therefore the security questions of 1 billion accounts might be known by the people who stole this, and also by the people who bought this data, and therefore they can access to their accounts, because even if they don't know the passwords, they are able to change the passwords. And usually people use the same security questions in one places and other places. It's not maybe a good practice, but they do. And therefore they can access to they can gain access to the not only to Yahoo accounts, but only maybe not to the bank account, but to other accounts, emails or whatever. Other emails, of course, because Yahoo also has email service. Yahoo forced all affected users to change password and to re-enter any unencrypted security questions and answers. Okay, because of course, since this, the security questions and answers are kept encrypted. In October of 2017, Yahoo changed the estimate to 3 billion user accounts, not to 1 million. Users' password in clear text, payment card data, and bank information, fortunately, were not stolen. Okay, passwords and payment cards, this was, so it was not that bad, but of course a security question might be also an important data breach. Facebook, well, it's not Facebook itself, but applications inside Facebook. Okay, in April 2019, the impact was of 540 million users. In this case, it was about 2 third-party Facebook applications datasets that were exposed to the public internet. One from the media company Cultura Colectiva. The dataset had a weight of 146 gigabytes, containing about 540 million records. And the dataset contained comments, likes, reactions, account numbers, Facebook identifiers, and more. Okay. And the other dataset, also from a Facebook integrated application titled At the Pool, it contained columns from the database, including the user here, user ID, Facebook user, okay, is the user in the application, or the ID in the user application, and the user, the friends, likes, music, movies, books, photos, events, groups, check-ins, interests, passwords, and more. Here, when it says password, presumably it refers to the password of the At the Pool application rather than for the user's Facebook account. But once again, many users would use the same password in both of them, because even many users do not they don't know how to differentiate between Facebook itself and At the Pool, and they might think even that the password is the same and whatever. So they might be using the same password and the password was stolen. What is not clear if it was in clear text or in encrypted information. Sorry. MySpace. This is one of the most known data breaches in history as well. In June 2013, the impact was of 360 million accounts. In June of 2013, around 360 million accounts were compromised by a Russian hacker, but the incident was not disclosed publicly until 2016. Okay, it happened in 2013, but it was disclosed publicly in 2016. The leaked information included account information of MySpace, such as the owner's listed name, the username, and the birth date. Between 2013 and 2016, anyone who gained access to this breached information could have taken over any MySpace account. Well, by this time, MySpace was not that popular, but they could gain access to any account. Okay, and the former social media network has invalidated the old passwords belonging to accounts that were set up before 2013. Okay, this is very critical because actually they could get access to the accounts. Okay, and now moving more to data breaches in healthcare. For instance, in September of 2015, Excelus which is an American company, had a data breach which affected to 10 million members. Of course, the numbers is not, in healthcare, the numbers are not as high as this one in MySpace or Facebook or whatever, because there are different insurance and healthcare companies, and they don't have so many users, but 10 million users or members is still too many people. In early 2015, a rush of cyber attacks targeting healthcare data. There was a rush of cyber attacks targeting healthcare data. Because of this, and not because they detected anything, because of that rush of cyber attacks, Excelus ordered a forensic review of its sound systems. And what they found out is the third largest healthcare data theft in history. Since December of 2013, some information had been exposed, and they only knew it in September 2015, almost 2 years later. This information included medical data, social security numbers, and financial information. You can see that here, of course, medical data might be very important because in some countries it might include financial information, but you have always social security numbers. And of course, in medical data is very, very important because it might be of much interest. Imagine that you get the medical data of the president of a country. That information might be very valuable for some people, and they might pay a large amount of money. Okay, so data security in healthcare is very, very, very important. Another company, Premera, in January 2015. This is the one of the ones that we are going to see now are in this rush of cyber attacks targeting healthcare data in early 2015. In this case, Premera found out the attack in January, not in September, after ordering a forensic review. The impact was of 11 million customers, and among other information, the attack had exposed bank account numbers, social security numbers, and claims information. In this case, not medical data. Okay, but it's still very important. And also in from that wave of attacks, we have in Anthem. In this case, once again in January of 2015, but in this case the impact is much higher. It's the biggest data leak in healthcare in history. Almost 80 million patient records were stolen. Luckily, it didn't include, or it doesn't seem plausible that it included medical information, but it still included names and home addresses. So a person with this information know the names and home addresses of 78.8 million patients. Social security numbers, claims information as well as before. Well, and more recently, and we are going to finish with this one, we have a data theft in the health sector of Oregon in January 2020, with an impact of 654,000 patients. In this case, I wanted to put this one because it was because of the theft. I commented this before. It was because of the theft of a laptop owned by the transportation vendor of the health sector of Oregon. This means that physical security controls and vendor management are very important, because usually we focus on cybersecurity, but we also need always physical security. Okay, if we have sensitive data in a laptop, we cannot have it uncontrolled. We cannot leave it somewhere in which or where it can be stolen. We have to be very careful. Well, first of all, we need to wonder, why is that sensitive information stored in a laptop? Is it actually necessary? We have to think about that, okay? But okay, it is necessary. If it is necessary, I have to be very careful. I need to provide physical security methods to watch that laptop properly. Okay, the notification did not clarify whether the laptop was encrypted or not. In this case, the stolen device contained patients' names, contact details, dates of birth, and Medicaid ID numbers. Okay, this is more recent. Also during the COVID wave, some medical breaches happened. I have not stated them here, but of course, what we can conclude is that medical information is very, very valuable, and it's always in the point of view of hackers, or well, more of cyber criminals, not hackers, because as I said before, hackers might be also ethical hackers, but it's a good target for cyber criminals because medical information might be really valuable in some markets. Well, and with this, I finished the first course of the series of online courses. I hope that it has met your expectations, and thank you very much for watching.